Hey readers, Matt here to tell you about a new series of book reviews on BankyKitty408. Now, as we all know, there are many different ways to tell a story. Two of the most prevalent ways in today's world are books and movies. In fact, many of our favorite movies have been based on our favorite books. But because these two storytelling methods are so different from each other, sometimes the stories will have to be tweaked a little bit in order to translate them to the visual medium. As a result, the stories become bastardized and sullied, and this new series of book reviews, Books versus Movies, will show you exactly how that happens, leaving you no doubt in the world that books will always be infinitely superior to...
Just a minute.
What?
You're not seriously going to go through with this, are you?
What do you mean?
You're actually going to get on YouTube to bash movies and rant about how books are better?
I'm not gonna bash movies, but come on, books are better.
Says you. But I think there is a reasonable argument to be made for movies. In fact, in a lot of ways, some movie versions are better than book versions.
No way.
Sometimes it just works better in a visual medium.
Look,
Come on, you cannot
just give me
deny
one example.
that there are
example of a movie that is better than the book on which it's based. One example.
Lord of the Rings.
No, I'm telling you, he created an intricate and complex world. He completely
Matt, and that is exactly
redefined
the problem.
fantasy as we know it. And the movie barely scratched the surface. It's like a drive-by tour, a cursory glance at this world that he created. He might have actually been able to find. Obviously, this one's open for debate, but you can't give me one that is clearly better than
Twilight.
No, Twilight does not count.
All right, fine. Mary Poppins.
All right, point taken.
Thank you. Now, what I'm suggesting is that instead of bashing movies, why not do an equal objective view of both books and movies and figure out which one is truly superior?
That's insane.
Think of it this way, Matt. You've got both book lovers and movie lovers watching you, and this appeals to both. Whereas if you just bash the movies, you're going to alienate a lot of movie lovers,
like I really
including
care about
one
any of
particular female who really likes movies.
Okay, fine, we'll do it your way. So I will look at both books and movies and try to objectively decide between them which... What now?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You, the bookworm, are gonna talk about movies? Come on, there's no way you'd be able to stay objective.
You just got finished telling me that I have to do this, and now you're gonna...
Right, that's why you have me.
You? Aren't you just me with a hat?
No, I'm a more reasonable, objective version of you who recognizes the merit of both books and movies. With a hat. Well, not that the movies have a hat, it's me.
Got it, thanks. Good grief, how many clones do I have now?
Try not to think about it.
So you'll be looking at the movies?
Yep, I'll be the Matt that looks at the movie side of things. I guess you could call me the Matt Hatter.
Are you going to be making jokes like that the entire time?
Oh, come on, I didn't even come up with that one.
Alright, fine. So in this new series of reviews, we will be looking at books and movies that are based on them.
We'll analyze each carefully, looking at characters, plot, and just in general, how each one uses its unique method of storytelling to its fullest advantage.
So wait, aren't we pretty much just ripping off this idea from the Nostalgia Critic?
Well, not exactly. He doesn't look at books, he looks at old movies versus recent remakes.
But the format's the same. You know, with the looking at the characters and the plot, and looking at which one's superior, and tallying up the score, and...
yeah, except for the part where we talk to ourselves. He doesn't do that.
True enough. I guess only we're that crazy.
Yeah. And Mika Kitty. And John Green. And Wheezy Waiter. And actually a lot of people on YouTube.
We hope you'll join us soon for the first of these new reviews on Roald Dahl's 1988 novel, Matilda,
and TriStar Pictures' 1996 film of the same name.
Roald Dahl is practically a legend among writers. He completely changed the way in which children's novels are written, and he is in many ways the original modern children's author.
His stories were so vivid and imaginative that it was easy to translate them to visual media. In fact, his most popular books are also movies. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, and the story we'll be kicking off our new series of reviews with today. This is Books vs. Movies review of Matilda.
Matilda was published in 1988, toward the end of Roald Dahl's career and life. It was easily one of his most popular and best-selling novels, and it was the next to last novel that he would write before his death in 1990.
So how does one take such a popular and well-told story and reimagine it? Well, in 1996, director Danny DeVito tried to do just that with TriStar Pictures' film Matilda, starring Mara Wilson, Pam Ferris, M. Beth Davetts, Rhea Perlman, and, well, Danny DeVito. The movie did fairly well and even managed to snag a few awards. But did it truly live up to the precedents that had been set by the original book? Let's find out.
We'll begin by looking at the title character, Matilda Wormwood. In the book, Matilda is described as a sweet, charming girl with extraordinary mental abilities who, unfortunately, lives with a highly unappreciative family.
The movie portrays her in much the same light, showing us the tiny Matilda spelling her name as a baby, dressing herself as a toddler, and making pancakes as a 3 or 4-year-old girl. Mara Wilson is able to pull off both intelligent and charming, and is a very likable character. But there are some differences too. The movie Matilda is a lot more rebellious. She sasses back to her parents and is a little more argumentative with Trunchbull than the book Matilda is. This gives her more of an edge.
Yes, it does. It also makes her, how can I put this, stupider.
Hey now, she is just as intelligent in the movie version as she is in the book version.
Yeah, okay, as far as book smarts is concerned, yeah, she's just as intelligent, but she is impulsive to the point of being reckless, as evidenced by the fact that she visits Trunchbull's house not once, but twice during the course of the movie.
Oh, come on, she did that out of loyalty for a teacher, with reaction to the way that she had been mistreated. You cannot honestly
Yes, but she did the same thing in the book. In fact, she doesn't even jump into the fray until she hears the story of Miss Honey's plight, and even then her reaction is to strategize rather than just act. In fact, that's the main difference between the two. Book Matilda is a strategist. She never acts until she knows exactly what's going on and what her plan of action should be. When Matilda writes the message from Magnus to Trunchbull on the chalkboard, that plan was the result of weeks of practice and planning, whereas movie Matilda made the plan almost literally last minute.
And doesn't that speak to her quick-mindedness?
To a point, and that point is she never would have had to come up with the plan last minute if she hadn't gone to Trunchbull's house with no plan other than just to freak her out. And then, of course, there's the newt scene. Damn it. Would you like to tell them, or shall I?
I'll do it. Trunchbull discovers a newt in her water, freaks out, and calls it a snake, and Matilda, acting in a very Hermione Granger-ish manner, just has to correct Trunchbull and tell her it's a newt.
I just thought you'd like to know it's not a snake, it's a newt.
Okay, one of the first things that you learn as a child in school is that when your teacher is hopping mad, you never call attention to yourself. Ever. You dumb kid.
Plus, movie Matilda uses her powers a lot more often, almost wastefully at times. Book Matilda only uses her powers to knock over the glass, to write the message on the board, and to practice writing the message on the board. Once movie Matilda discovers her powers, she uses them for everything, and I mean everything.
Now this, coupled with her impulsiveness, does make her a little bit more childlike than her literary counterpart.
But the book Matilda was childlike too, demonstrating an ability to make friends and relate to people while still being incredibly intelligent and being more cautious and thinking things through carefully. Her role as a strategist is much more consistent with her higher level of intelligence, and for that reason I think that the book Matilda is the stronger character.
So now that we've examined our protagonist, let's look at the other side of things and look at the antagonists. This movie was very well cast. Roald Dahl is a master of creating caricature-like characters, so you honestly couldn't do better than Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman as the Wormwoods. True, they don't look exactly like how they're described in the books, but the point is that they look ridiculous, because the Wormwoods are thoroughly ridiculous people.
For all the antagonists, and for the Wormwoods especially, the movie went more for comedy than the book. The Wormwoods in the books are really more cruel and overbearing than amusing.
The Wormwoods in the movie are actually both. DeVito makes us laugh, but can also be very intimidating, which, let's face it, is no easy task for a man who's only 5 feet tall. The movie also has the addition of Mikey.
Ugh, Mikey. What a little prick. He's in the book too, but not as an antagonist. In the book, Mikey's mostly just there to be the oldest son and to give a contrast between how his parents treat him and how they treat Matilda. He isn't really mean to Matilda, though he's not nice to her either. He doesn't really interact with her at all.
In the movie, Mikey's exactly the type of obnoxious, spoiled older brother you would expect in this type of environment. He's just as mean to Matilda as his parents are. This makes him a tad more realistic, as well as more of an antagonist.
But what about Trunchbull? Well, in the book, the Trunchbull is a huge, loud, and overbearing headmistress who truly cares about the education of her students.
Wait. What?
She cares about the education of her students.
She insults them, she abuses them, and yet you're saying
Just hear me out. Yes, Trunchbull insults and abuses the students, but only if they get an answer wrong. She asks them a question, if they get the wrong answer, then she insults and abuses them until they get the answer correct, and then she stops and moves on. Now, I'm not going to say that this is the best teaching method in the world, because it isn't, but she does at least attempt to teach them something that they were supposed to have learned that week. Whereas the movie Trunchbull doesn't really try to teach them anything. She just insults and abuses them the whole time.
Okay, maybe. But that doesn't explain why Trunchbull targets Matilda so suddenly in the book. In the movie, Trunchbull does the same horrible things, but she always has a reason. Because again, Matilda is reckless to the point of being stupid. When Trunchbull threatens to expel Matilda in the book, it's pretty much an empty threat, because Matilda legitimately didn't do anything. And there's also the fact that Trunchbull takes the word of a used car salesman who cheated her over the word of a teacher. In the movie, Wormwood cheating her is actually part of the reason why she targets Matilda in the first place. And she doesn't threaten Matilda with expulsion until she finds out that Matilda broke into her house, which is a pretty legitimate reason to expel someone. Also, just like the Wormwood, she is at times comical, but also very intimidating. She mocks the children a lot more than in the book, but the way it's shot, you can see why the students quake with fear when they see her. But probably what I like best about the movie is the fact that we get to see Trunchbull outside of school. Now, do you remember what Roald Dahl said about children and how they relate to teachers in the book?
Sure. In the book, Roald Dahl talks about how children don't tend to see their teachers as people, but more like entities that appear in the classroom at the beginning of the school day and just disappear at the end of the school day. He says this in reference to Matilda getting to see where Miss Honey lives and how she spends her time outside of school.
However, the book does not give us the same exploration of Trunchbull and the movie does. Matilda's ill-advised visits to her house give us a glimpse into Trunchbull's everyday life, which also shows us something that Trunchbull fears, something that, again, we didn't see in the book. This rounds out the character a little more, making her more of a horrible person rather than just a horrible thing. Ultimately, the antagonists of the movie are just a little bit better conceived, taking the original ideas of Roald Dahl and capitalizing on them to give us truly ridiculous and yet detestable villains.
But what about the other characters? They play a big role in the telling of this story, so let's take a look. We'll start with Miss Honey, Matilda's teacher. Both book and movie portray her as a kind and loving person who adores her students and gets great joy out of teaching, so much so that she can't bear the thought of leaving her job, even if it means leaving her overbearing Aunt Trunchbull for good.
The movie Miss Honey had a little bit more of an edge to her. She was a little braver and actually stood up to Miss Trunchbull a couple of times.
Now, the book Miss Honey does admit that she's not a brave person and that she has difficulty standing up to people, but in a way, that kind of draws a nice contrast between her and Matilda. They both had similar situations growing up, and yet they both emerge with these very different personalities. On top of that, the Miss Honey in the book is a lot more blunt with her students about Miss Trunchbull. She doesn't sugarcoat anything. She tells them straight up just how horrible she is.
Though it could be that the movie Miss Honey would have done that as well had they started at the beginning of the school year like they did in the book.
For me, though, the deciding point is the kids. Now, in the book, Cruncham Hall is described as a war zone, with this long-standing and ongoing war between the students and Trunchbull.
The movie portrays them more like an oppressed and downtrodden population under the thumb of a cruel dictator, with little to no rebellion. They have a lot more fear of her in the movie, as evidenced by the continuous and, after a while, silly scared takes. It isn't until after Matilda arrives that rebellion starts to take place, which you can see in the way Trunchbull reacts to the riot and the cake-eating scene. She doesn't know what to do and loses control of her students, and you can see the panic in her eyes.
Whereas in the book, she quells them with a glance, as if she's used to this sort of thing. Also in the book, what starts the riot is not Matilda as it is in the movie. In fact, Matilda doesn't do much of anything during this scene except watch and comment occasionally. What gets the kids going is that despite the fact that Bruce Bogtrotter has eaten 3/4 of this enormous cake, he is still going strong and is determined to finish the entire thing.
In the movie, Bruce is ready to give in, and it isn't until Matilda starts cheering him on that he finds the strength to keep going.
This is true of the other characters as well. Hortensia in the book is described as a heroic and battle-scarred soldier who brags about the many pranks she's pulled on Trunchbull in her day.
Movie Hortensia, while still having a toughened edge about her, just talks about how horrible Trunchbull is.
Lavender, Matilda's friend, pranks the Trunchbull by putting a newt in her drinking water. In the book, however, this is carefully planned. She volunteers to get the water, waits for most of the afternoon to catch the newt, and keeps it until the next day. Her inspiration to do so comes from the pranks that Hortensia told her about.
In the movie, the catching of the newt is incidental, and the idea to put the newt in the water literally occurs to her at the last minute. And the inspiration seems to be that Matilda has been put in the chokey.
The main difference here is that in the book, Matilda merely strikes the final blow in a long-fought battle, whereas in the movie, she actually incites the rebellion that eventually topples the Trunchbull. Now, there's nothing wrong with either of these portrayals. They're both consistent with the message of the story, but for reasons that I'll explain later, I prefer the book's version.
For reasons you'll explain later? What kind of an out is that?
Well, I'll talk about that more when we talk about story. For now, I'll just say that in the book, Matilda has a certain amount of kinship with her fellow students because of all the pranks that she herself had pulled on her parents. In the movie, however, she's more set apart from them. She emerges as more of a rebellious influence, which again, isn't bad, but I like the book's portrayal better.
Yet you won't tell us why.
You'll find out. Just be patient.
Fine. Whatever. There are a few more characters too, but they don't really overlap. Overall, it's the kids in Cruncham Hall who make up the bulk of the supporting cast, and they seem to be more strongly portrayed in the book. Though for what reason, I'm not sure. Now comes one of the more ambiguous categories: imagery. How did each medium use its own unique method of storytelling to its fullest advantage to best create this fictional world?
Roald Dahl is one of those authors whose writing is so vivid and descriptive that it translates really easily to film. His way of describing that which seems most insignificant or ridiculous and yet is very appropriately descriptive about a character is a method that is emulated by many children's authors today.
So how do you take that style and translate it into movie form? Casting, again, is a big part of it. Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman practically look like caricatures themselves, and Pam Ferris pulled off Trunchbull perfectly. The makeup work for Trunchbull is marvelous as well, making her look both comical and intimidating. And also a little disgusting, something that wasn't really played up in the book. Locations are also done really well. The Wormwoods house is lit in such a way that while it seems like a nice enough house, you can still tell that a fully dysfunctional family lives there. Cruncham Hall, which doesn't get much of a description in the book at all, looks like the kind of oppressive environment you would expect with the Trunchbull as your headmistress, and yet still looks very much like a school.
It should be noted that the book does dabble in a visual medium as well. Like many of Roald Dahl's books, Matilda contains illustrations by a longtime collaborator of Dahl's, Quentin Blake. The drawings are always very whimsical and childlike, but to be honest, the story doesn't really need them.
Interestingly enough, the movie also dabbles in the book's territory by having Danny DeVito narrate certain parts.
As children, many of us might have had books read to us by our parents before we went to sleep at night, including stories by Roald Dahl. As such, Dahl wrote his stories in such a way that they're almost meant to be read aloud. And so it's possible that our first encounter with a Roald Dahl story was not a reading experience, but a listening experience.
Which makes the fact that we have parts of the movie read to us, mostly just transitions and background material, that much more poignant. But what really makes the movie is the way it's shot. You have to admire the use of forced perception in this movie. Matilda in the book is described as a small girl, but in the movie we really get a feel for how small she is. Everything and everybody looks larger than life, which again, with an actor like Danny DeVito, is no easy task. Extreme close-ups of the Wormwoods and Trunchbull show us every detail of their faces, making them look much more like caricatures, but also more intimidating. Plus, I love the way we're introduced to Trunchbull.
In the book, when Trunchbull first appears on the scene, we don't get a full description because the narrator of the story isn't quite ready to give it. I mean, this woman is so scary, the freaking narrator is afraid of her.
The movie portrays this by not showing us her face for the first few minutes she's on screen. We see her silhouette, her back, her feet, everything but her face, up until her first direct encounter with Matilda. This not only makes her seem larger than life, but it perfectly captures that intimidation that even the narrator of the book felt.
And we can't ignore the magic. Again, the book Matilda doesn't use her powers nearly as much as the movie Matilda, but when she does, they're pretty straightforward. She wants the glass to tip over, and it does. She wants the chalk to float, and it does.
The movie reflected this by having the special effects be as simple and straightforward as possible. There's nothing flashy about them. The few scenes that might be there for the purpose of showing off the special effects don't last very long, and they don't distract from the story. That's the sign of good special effects, in my opinion. They get the job done, but not so obviously that you can tell that there are special effects happening. And in this instance, it captures the simplicity of Matilda's powers. So overall, the imagery of the movie took the already brilliant imagery of the book, built on it, and made it even better, which is exactly what a movie based on a book should do.
But now it comes down to the ultimate selling point, the story. Which method told the story better? Both book and movie hit all the major scenes and tell the story in pretty much the same way. There are, however, some key differences.
First, even though we get narration in the movie, it's not what Roald Dahl wrote. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, and in fact, it sounds as though Roald Dahl could have written the narration. And the narration definitely tightens up the story a bit. A lot of the book sounds like a series of short stories, and the movie definitely keeps it all tightened together and keeps it flowing as one story. The movie also isolates Matilda a lot more in the first act, and really plays up the loneliness of being a smart girl with a dysfunctional family. This makes Matilda's situation in the movie a little more realistic.
But then the book does make Matilda's situation a lot darker, and the fact that Matilda's loneliness isn't played up is what balances out that darkness. Whereas the movie relies on comic relief and slapstick.
Okay, see, this is why you don't get to talk about the movies.
Are you going to deny that there is a lot of slapstick in this movie?
Of course there is, but the slapstick routines don't even last that long. They don't distract from the story, and come on, keep in mind this is a children's movie.
That's true. You've got me there. The movie was intended for children, whereas the book was intended... Oh, wait, the book was intended for children,
Visual medium,
too.
Matt, remember? Maybe those things work really well in book form, but a movie, a visual medium, needs more visually exciting...
Such as an extra subplot with FBI agents.
You have to bring that up. You
Look,
have to bring
I
up
just think that if you're going to talk about how much
major-
tighter the story is in the movie, you should probably talk about this extra subplot that probably wasn't necessary.
Okay, fine. Yes, the movie does add a little more comic relief with FBI agents Bob and Bill, hapless detectives who watch Wormwood's house in the hopes of finding enough evidence to have him arrested. Now, to be fair, these scenes with the two do serve to make the Wormwoods a little more of a constant presence in the movie than they are in the book, as well as to remind us that Harry Wormwood is in fact a criminal, as if we need reminding. But really, they don't serve a whole lot of purpose in the story outside of comic relief, and pretty mediocre comedy at that. Though, I mean, come on, you've got Pee Wee Herman playing an FBI agent. How is that not hilarious just on its own?
But for me, what it really comes down to is the message. Now, both book and movie have a very strong child empowerment message, but I think that the book's message is a little bit stronger. Here's why. Remember what I said about the school being portrayed as a war zone?
Yeah, I was kind of wondering when you'd get back to that.
This shows us that the children were perfectly capable of standing up to Trunchbull before Matilda came along, even though Matilda was the one to strike the final blow. In the movie, Matilda instigates the rebellion, and seems to be the sole reason why anyone stands up to Trunchbull at all. She's not quite on an equal level with her peers, and because the movie is more power-centered than intelligence-centered, like the book is, it seems more like the powers were just arbitrarily bestowed on her. In that way, it seems to be more about the empowerment of one child as opposed to all of them. This is also supported by the book's explanation of Matilda's powers. Basically, her powers manifested because she wasn't being allowed to use her incredible intelligence to its fullest potential. And once she is moved up to the top form in school, her powers disappear. In the movie, there is no explanation for Matilda's powers, and we even see her using them at the very end. The book's explanation of the powers makes it seem more like any child could have them if they were in a similar situation, and that if people try to squelch a child's abilities, those abilities will shine through regardless, speaking more to the empowerment of all children, not just the lucky ones who get powers. The movie has a strong child empowerment message too, but it's more of the kids rule adults drool variety, especially in the final scene with Trunchbull where she's chased from the school. The book's message is much stronger and more universal, and in my opinion, that makes it the better story.
So, text media wins this time around. Now, that doesn't mean that this movie isn't worth seeing, as it does do an excellent job of capturing the spirit of Roald Dahl's original story. And it doesn't mean that books are always going to win in these reviews. Right, Matt?
Yeah.
Right, Matt?
Book wins,
Book wins in your face, Mad Hatter.
Matt.
Book is superior. That's
Matt, come on,
right.
seriously.
Yeah, the book won. Books are better.
Seriously, knock it off.
Books rule
Matt.
and movies true. Books
Would you
rule,
stop with
movies
this?
true.
Could you show a little bit of maturity, please? Come on, it's not that big a deal. Okay, yeah, you won, great.
Yeah.
Matt, would you, with the singing and the dancing, would you knock it off?
Mad Hatter's
Would you
going
just,
down. Mad
screw
Hatter's
this, I'm outta
going
here.
down.
Hey everybody, Matt Guyan here again, doing commentary for my Books vs. Movies review of Matilda. Everyone seemed to like the commentary I did for Little Mermaid, so I thought I'd do another one for my first ever Books vs. Movies review. Oh, wow. It's really interesting to see how much things have changed. I don't use that angle, for one thing. I have it more directly on myself and the television. And I also do not do the have the thing directly on the movie playing directly on the television anymore, because as you can see from that clip, it looks kind of crappy. But at the time, I did not have any like DVD ripper software on my computer. All I had was the like a video screen capture, I think it's called Jing, that I downloaded for free. And so that's what I used to get all the clips on there, and then of course I had the actual DVD playing in the background. Now, however, I think Time Traveler's Wife is when I finally got, you just paid the $40 for the stuff. Yeah, you can see it's kind of jerky. It's not nearly as smooth as it is as it is now. And there's no audio. Because the audio is usually out of sync, and you only use it like very rarely. But the audio is out of sync, and it gets like more progressively out of sync the longer you capture. So the way I would do it in the beginning is I would just find the clips. I would literally play it on QuickTime and find the clips that I needed, and then just capture what I needed, and then go from there. And then for the screen, I would just have to turn around, play what I wanted, turn around, say the line, and then pause it and go back and cue it up. It took a lot of time, actually. It takes a lot less time to just rip the whole thing onto my computer and use that. Like, that took a lot of effort, and so I'm glad I finally got the DVD ripping technology. It also looks a lot better. It also means that it's a lot easier for me to get the copyright ID, third-party content stuff on YouTube, but whatever. Yeah, there are a lot more arguments too early on. I think when I originally conceived of the idea, I had it in mind that these were two separate. Like the other, like Movie Matt was more of a clone, and now it's just like he's just me with a hat. They're both me, but the hat just makes me more reasonable. But in this case, I think I actually had I had it in mind that it would be two separate people, and so we had a lot more arguments. The arguments were fun to write and they were fun to edit, but at the same time it was really easy to lose track of where we were and who was speaking and all that sort of thing. And so I finally just stopped doing them. I only did this for this review. I only showed like shots from the actual book for this review. And I still really like the idea because I'm showing movie clips, so it makes sense that I show clips from the book too, like text from the book, and if there's pictures, and pictures from the book. It just took too much time. Like these take a lot of time as it is, and that was just one extra thing, and no one really seemed to miss it when I stopped doing it, so I haven't really done it since. I did have a commenter suggest that I read clips, segments of the book, and I might actually do that for the Twilight review. I mean, yeah, there's stuff you obviously gotta make fun of in the Twilight review, so. So, Books vs. Movies was an idea. It came from two places. One was my friend Ruth, Ghostwritten87, who, for a vlog driver review, actually recommended that I do Where the Wild Things Are, looking at the book and movie simultaneously and comparing them. And I thought that was a great idea, but it was something that I had to really cram into 4 minutes for the vlog driver review, because I try to keep those under 4 minutes. And so I did that, and then I had just started watching Nostalgia Critic. And this is the second place, Nostalgia Critic. I just started watching him, and I loved his old versus new reviews. That was, I think it's still my favorite segment of his, is the old versus new reviews, where he does basically what I do, except with an old nostalgic movie, comparing it to a reimagining of the movie. He's done 7 of those now, I think, and they're really fun to watch, especially if you like comparative reviews. And I pretty much stole like the whole format from him, like going like the 5 different categories and comparing them bit by bit and having the winner. Yeah, the audio is really off on those title screens too. Like I finally straightened that out in the next review, but in the beginning it just doesn't sound nearly as polished. The title screens have stayed pretty much exactly the same. Like I changed the words obviously for the rounds, but the everything else stays pretty much exactly the same. That hasn't changed much in the intervening months since I started doing this. But yeah, so a lot of, and you can really see in this one, like there are some things that I steal like directly from Nostalgia Critic in this particular review. But yeah, it was just kind of an idea, and choosing Matilda, like Matilda for my first review, that was pretty much an arbitrary choice. That's just the book that I happened to be reading for my favorite books review. I happened to be reading at the time. Just so I said, okay, well, it was made into a movie, and I know the movie, and I can get my hands on it easily, so yeah, I'll do that as my first one. And I actually, at the end of the Matilda favorite books review, I had like a little, kind of like movie mat shows up and says, hey, you're going to talk about the movie? I said, no, this is a book review. If we were doing to compare it to the movie, it would be a completely different review, and movie mat just kind of does this, and then that's the end of it, but yeah. So. Yeah, here's another argument. Because I don't. The other thing with this one is that it's really difficult to figure out who's speaking sometimes, because I'm showing the clips and I'm showing the pages from the book, and of course it's this they're both me, duh. So it's hard to tell sometimes who's speaking. And that was one of the comments I got, is that it's just sometimes hard to tell who's saying what. So especially with the arguments as well. So what I do now is that whenever I switch personas, go from book mat to movie mat or vice versa, whenever I switch personas, excuse me, I will always show a clip of the person who's speaking first, even if it's just for a few seconds. I show a clip of that person speaking first, and then if I need to show clips from the movie, then I will show clips from the movie. But I no matter what, I show that clip first. Yeah. One thing I've realized, we're on Antagonists now, and one thing that I've realized is that Matilda, the movie, is a really, really good adaptation of the book. Like, it's one of the better ones that I've seen. But if you haven't read the book, Matilda, and you're not really familiar with the way that Roald Dahl writes, it's pretty disturbing. Like, I've heard people talk about how, it is kind of disturbing, with the principal or the headmistress throwing a girl over the fence by her hair, and throwing kids out the window, and all these just terrible things that Trunchbull is doing. And yeah, I mean, if you're not familiar with the fact that Roald Dahl does write that kind of stuff, because his writing, and also if you're reading Roald Dahl, it does come off as very whimsical because it's just the way that he writes. So it doesn't seem like something that's really happening, whereas of course in a movie it does. But then, the things that are happening in Matilda aren't really any worse than the stuff that's happening in, like, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So, but it can look, and a lot of it is kind of unpleasant, and it's meant to be, especially with the antagonists, I think, because there's a lot of wide-angle, close-ups of Wormwood and Trunchbull. Just because, trying to make them seem more like caricatures of themselves and trying to make them seem more gross and unpleasant, which they are. And so that totally makes sense, but I can see that if you haven't read the book, how this can be kind of an unpleasant movie to watch, and just not a fun movie sometimes. I still like it. I still think it, and I know that a lot of people do. It's Roald Dahl. Yeah, you can see a lot of repeated clips, just because I didn't have the whole movie to work with. Oh, and you'll notice this is not split in 3 parts. I put it together in one. Back when I started doing this, you were only allowed to upload 10-minute movies, 10-minute videos to YouTube, no more than 10 minutes. And then they upped it to 15, and then my channel got approved for more than 15. So basically, if the video is still under 2 gigs of size, it can be as long as I want it to be. Those book shots, by the way, was just me pointing a camera at the book. I mean, nothing more complicated than that. Movie Matt is also not wearing what he wears now. Now I have black hoodies that Movie Matt wears that I got from Threadless. What he's wearing here is just a black button-down shirt, just around whatever shirt I happen to be wearing at the time. There's a spot where I would have done it differently had I had like the full clip. Had I had the ripping technology. I would have actually gotten like the various gasps, like just shown all the time that the kids gasp, because that is one of the really just not very good aspects of the movie. It's just like they do that all the time. They always have that kind of that reaction. It's just like okay, yeah. I mean, it's a kids movie, but still. But that's something I would have done differently had I had the technology at my disposal. Won a gold medal, Brucey. Forgot about that one. I've also changed, because I have a bookshelf in the living room now, so I've changed the room around a bit, and so Mad Hatter now sits to the right of the television instead of to the left. So that's changed. Rereading the book, I really like the character of Hortensia in the book. I mean, I really do like the way that she's portrayed as just this, valiant soldier. And Lavender, all the kids. That was one of the things I really liked about the book on the reread. It's just the way they treat this school like it, really do treat it like it's a war zone. And the movie doesn't do that. And the movie is very much about Matilda and her influence, and the book is more about everybody, and just Matilda gave that final shove, but everybody had been working to bring about change, bring down the cruel dictator that was the headmistress Trunchbull.
Now, there's nothing wrong with either of these portrayals. They're both consistent with the message of the story, but for reasons that I'll explain later, I prefer the book's version. For reasons you'll explain later?
I don't do this anymore. If I have something that I need to explain later in another category, then I just explain it later in the other category. Yeah. The relationship between the two characters really has changed. Like I said, this really is it really does seem more like two people, like Matt and his clone. Yet as I said in my Little Mermaid Books vs. Movies review, I'm more like Mad Hatter in real life than I am like the other guy, regular Matt. So now we get into the catch-all category of imagery. This is one area where I did have to deviate from Nostalgia Critic, because I mean his categories are pretty much just character, some other aspect, and then story at the end. And I do have story at the end, and I do cover like the various character categories. But I knew I had to do something to talk about specifically the advantages of text versus the advantages of visual. Imagery has evolved too. Like, it's evolved more to include just exactly what it sounds like, the imagery. Just it's more of a description versus visuals now. Just what does the author or authors or directors or what everybody involved in the making of the story, what do they do to best use their individual aspect to its advantage? And I focus more on like what you're seeing, whether it's in your imagination or whether it's on the screen. But originally, this was kind of, like I said, this was the catch-all category. This was like, okay, anything that's not covered in characters and story, I'll talk about here. And I've kind of moved away from that because first of all, I brought up the category of composition in a later, I think that was Time Traveler's Wife too. I brought up the category of composition and started talking about that, and that was often covered in imagery. And now I usually have the imagery category, but sometimes I just do composition because there's not that much to talk about with regards to imagery. And generally, my imagery category, you may have noticed this, my imagery category is generally my shortest one. It's just... it's just, okay, this is how the book does things, this is how the movie does things, this one is better. Like, I don't have to get into anything really intricate with that particular category. Thank you. That was a shot we definitely needed. Yeah, I really do like the use of forced perspective in this movie, especially with Danny DeVito. I mean, to make somebody look significantly shorter than Danny DeVito, even if it's a kid, it's really no easy task.
I mean, this woman is so scary. The freaking narrator is afraid of her.
Yeah, that was one aspect of the book I really liked too. Just, you know, and imagery is a funny category because I've gotten both of these comments actually, where somebody will say book should always win imagery, or someone will say movie will always win imagery. I've gotten both of those comments, which I think shows, you know, this category can be won by either one. It just, you know, it depends on whether you're looking at precisely what is on the screen, you know, how they're choosing to portray things to you, or your imagination. Can your imagination outdo what technology can do? And sometimes it can, and sometimes it can't. It usually depends on how imaginative the story is in the first place. Sometimes I will pick one just because I really, really like the way they use the imagery to their advantage. And this was the case here. I picked movie because that's one of the things I really do admire about this movie, is that for all that it's about magic and, you know, this girl with powers and so on, there's
the story. Which method told the story better?
But one of the things I really like about the special effects here is just there's not that much that's like real that has a lot of CGI. There's some, but that's mostly just like the stuff for the trailer. But a lot of the effects are not that. A lot of the effect, like I love the one with the chalk. I don't think I mentioned this in the review, but when the chalk is writing on the board, the message on the board at the end, literally what they did is they had a guy on the other side of the chalkboard with a magnet, and they put the other magnet inside the chalk, and he just wrote the message backwards, and so the chalk wrote it the right way around on the chalkboard. I love that. It's so simple, and yet it works. Like I never would have guessed that that's what they did, but it's just, you know, it's one of those cases where they say, okay, we're not here to show off special effects. What do we absolutely need to tell this story, and how can we do this in the most simple way possible?
Was intended for children, whereas the book was intended. Oh wait, the book was intended for children too.
Yeah, this is another one of those arguments that probably could have been cut out. Oh, Bob. Yeah, I am aware, by the way, that one of the FBI agents is Pee Wee Herman. I don't think that I actually mentioned that. Someone commented, so that tells me that I didn't mention it. Yeah, that right there. There he is, Pee Wee Herman. Not speaking in the Pee Wee Herman voice, so I didn't notice it first until I think I was watching it with my parents, and one of them pointed it out, and then I looked at it. Yeah, that is Pee Wee Herman. What the hell? I mean, when you got Pee Wee Herman playing an FBI agent, that's... Yeah, you're at least trying. And don't get me wrong, they were distracting from the story, but these guys are fairly amusing. Like, you know, it's not laugh out loud funny, but they're fairly amusing. You know, just as kind of these adults that are foiled. That's another aspect of the movie that I do kind of talk about in this category too, that I think people are, you know, it kind of puts people off from this movie, is that almost all of the adults are bad guys, or, you know, jerks or douches or something like that. You know, they're not nice people. The only exception is Miss Honey and the librarian who's in the movie for like a minute. But pretty much everyone, the Wormwoods, the Trunchbulls, the FBI agents, the cook at the school, you know, the kids are the good guys and the adults are the bad guys. And that it's nothing more complicated than that. It's this kids, the kids rule adults drool. And I've seen a lot of kids movies kind of fall into that trap where the adults are all the bad guys. That's kind of the Nickelodeon phenomenon, I think. But it just, yeah, and this is a much better explanation for it. And the nice thing about the book is that the only bad guys were the Wormwoods and Trunchbull. Like, that was pretty much it. The teachers, we don't see much of them, but we get, from the little bit that we do see, we get the feeling that they're like, okay, we're just going to do our jobs, we'll try to soften the blow as much as possible. They were teachers along the lines of Miss Honey, it's just that Miss Honey was the only one that we saw. So it's not like all the adults were bad guys. Like, you don't even see any adults. You don't even see any other teachers. So it's just like, oh, well, they're attacking the headmistress. I guess we'll just watch. Yeah. You don't even see any of it except for the cook, the cafeteria lady. That's it. So I still stand by the book being better. Probably I might judge the movie a little bit more harshly if I did this again, but I still do think it's a pretty good adaptation of the book. Oh God, here it comes. No. Matt dancing should not happen. Yeah. I feel like sometimes I'm running out of creative ways to end my reviews, but I don't always need creative ways to end my reviews, but oh, that's embarrassing. That's embarrassing. And then he lost the next 3 reviews. I noticed that, but the next 3 books versus movies reviews were all wins for movies. Yeah, and there's the scoreboard. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed.
Hello friends and neighbors. Well, it's been over 2 years since Hatter and I started doing books versus movies reviews. The reviews have evolved a lot since then. I moved to another bookshelf, Hatter moved to the other side of the television, our hair is longer, the video clips don't look like crap, and we actually appear in the same frame now on occasion. But more importantly than all of that, we approach reviews differently now. Some of the rules that we established originally have either been tweaked or abandoned completely. And it's fair to say that if we were given the chance to do some of the early reviews again, we might approach them a little bit differently. So I thought, why not do it now? In celebration of our first 30 episodes, as well as the first 2 years of us doing this, and also compensation for the fact that I'm not at VidCon this year, sorry. Before we get going with our official 3rd season, Reg and I would like to take another look at 3 of our early books versus movies reviews that, if we were given the chance, we'd like to do over again. Now, it's important to note that the overall outcome of these 3 reviews will not be changing. If book or movie won the first time around, it's gonna win again, and the overall score is not going to change. This is basically a do-over. A chance to do justice to a review that maybe didn't get what it deserved the first time around due to our inexperience. And before you ask, this is not going to become a regular thing. This is likely the only time we're going to do this, so please don't ask us to redo another review for you. Trust me, these are hard enough to do once. With that said, let's get started with our redo of our very first Books vs. Movies review, Roald Dahl's last and possibly finest work, and the Danny DeVito film based on it, Matilda. I should mention that my main reason for wanting to do a do-over for this review is a Little London musical that's also based on this story but has no relation to the movie. And when I say little musical, I mean musical that was nominated for every Olivier Award that it was eligible for and won 8 of those awards. I mean, this musical is pretty freaking huge in London, and rumor has it that it might be coming to Broadway next spring. And I suppose there's no point in putting this off, so... Cassie?
I'm here.
Okay, Cass, let's get a couple of things straight here. You understand that the original outcome of the review is not going to change.
Right.
The musical's not going to win.
Got it.
Because technically we haven't even seen it. We've only listened to the cast recording.
Yes, got it. No love for musicals as usual. Let's get on with it.
Okay. Well, round 1 looks, as it did before, at our main protagonist and title character, Matilda. Like we said in the original review, Matilda is portrayed in both versions as sweet, charming, mature, and very intelligent for her age. She's basically the sort of child that any parent should want. Except that her parents don't want her. In fact, a number of people in the story seem to be working against Matilda, apparently not realizing that they basically have a child prodigy on their hands. In the movie, she's portrayed by Mara Wilson, whose acting is sort of... meh. I mean, she does alright, but she's not one of the strongest child actors I've ever seen. Still, the movie does a pretty good job of showing us her intelligence, showing us how she's able to take care of herself when her parents neglect her, and most especially showing us her voracious love for reading. The main problem with movie Matilda, as I mentioned before, is that she doesn't have nearly as much common sense. I'm not going to go so far as to say she's stupid, because she's not. She's just a kid, and moreover, she's a kid who hasn't really had the chance to learn the ropes of what you're supposed to do when you're a kid. So it kind of makes sense sense that she would call Trunchbull out on the newt thing. But still, when the headmistress is clearly hopping mad, why would you correct her on such a small thing?
I just thought you'd like to know it's not a snake, it's a newt.
It just strikes me as being incredibly stupid. Plus, she's just plain reckless. She doesn't think. She goes to Trunchbull's house twice to take things from it. That kind of works, though, given the different direction the movie decides to take regarding the school, which we'll get into in the later rounds. But Matilda has basically taken it upon herself to stand up to the injustices that she faces. So she fights back whenever she sees the opportunity, and most of the time, she fights alone. Her battle against Trunchbull is a very personal one, and she takes a lot more risks. Also, it's important to remember that through it all, Matilda is still a kid. She's gonna do stupid things every so often. But one of the great things about Book Matilda is that she's a strategist. She actually thinks through each of her pranks and knows how to work with what she has. The main difference I get between the two Matildas is a difference in the definition of intelligence. Matilda of the movie is definitely a reader. Pretty much everything she learned how to do she got from a book. And of course she's read a lot of them, but in the movie you get the sense that she really doesn't think for herself that much. With Matilda of the book, though, you get the sense that she eventually grows beyond that and starts thinking for herself. In fact, that's where the magic comes from. Where in the movie it's a gift that seems to have been arbitrarily bestowed upon her, in the book the magic is a result of the fact that all of this intelligence inside of her is being squelched by her parents and Trunchbull. And it just kind of manifests into these telekinetic powers that go away as soon as those people are out of the picture. And she only uses her powers a total of 3 times in the novel, whereas in the movie she uses them all the freaking time. Mostly to, let's be honest, show off the special effects. Now, she does derive her power from the anger she feels at her oppression, but the point isn't there nearly as strongly as it is in the book. So, it kind of seems like the Matilda of the book was definitely intelligent, whereas the Matilda from the movie was just lucky.
Now, like we said, we haven't actually seen this musical. We've only heard the cast recording. But Matilda in this musical leans more toward the book characterization, especially in the use of her powers, which she hardly uses at all. There's a song she sings called Quiet, which really exemplifies this whole magic emerging due to the squelched intelligence thing. She sings about all these things she has going on in her head, from the thoughts she has to the way that her parents and the Trunchbull oppress her. She also sings a song called Naughty, which acts as an overarching theme for the whole musical. That theme being that you have to stand up for yourself when things are going badly. Also, Matilda's played by 4 adorable British children, so there's that. As far as book and movie go, though, I have to side with Reg. The movie tried to capture that aspect of Matilda's personality, but they didn't succeed nearly as effectively as the book did.
And as good as Matilda is, that's how bad her parents and headmistress are. So let's take a look at Antagonists. Matilda was raised by the most rotten parents in the world, the Wormwoods. The father is a used car salesman who enjoys making his money by cheating his customers and spends most of his spare time watching television. And the mother is neglectful, lives only to spend the money that Mr. Wormwood earns, and also spends most of her spare time watching television. The book describes them by first telling us about all the parents who think that their children are the most wonderful things in the world, and then turning to the Wormwoods who think that their child is a blight on the face of the earth. The movie also gives us Michael, Matilda's older brother. He's in the book too, but not really as an antagonist. Not really as much of anything at all. He's just kind of in the story to illustrate that it's not that the Wormwoods hate all children, or even hate all of their children. Just Matilda. Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood are played by Danny DeVito, who also directed the film, and Rhea Perlman, his real-life wife. On top of being able to play the neglectful parents really, really well, they also look, well, quite frankly ridiculous. DeVito is notoriously short, and his wife is, well, not. And this actually is a pretty early and clear indication of the direction that the movie chose to go with the antagonist, at least as far as the Wormwoods are concerned. As I mentioned in the last review, the Wormwoods are comical in the movie in a way that they really aren't in the book. Roald Dahl is whimsical in his writing, don't get me wrong, but there's a dark reality to these parents that really doesn't come through in the movie. Though it's not something that we want to readily admit, we know that these people exist. People that, for whatever reason, hate their kids. There's humor in the book too, but most of it comes from the reaction of Matilda's parents to the pranks. The parents basically exist to say that you should stand up for yourself when you're being wronged, even if you're a kid and even if the people who are wronging you are your parents. In order for that message to come through, the parents have to be authentic, and in the movie, they really aren't. The Wormwoods are pretty much rendered ineffectual by the first third of the story, however, and then we're introduced to a new villain, Miss Trunchbull, headmistress at Cruncham Hall Elementary. And I'm probably mixing up my Britishisms and my Americanisms here, but whatever. Trunchbull is an awful human being. She hates children, and she does things like throw them over the wall by their pigtails and lock them in a dark closet with spikes and nails sticking out of the walls. The movie does a great job of making her seem huge, intimidating, and ugly, with wide-angle close-ups of her face, forced perspective on her size, and the fact that during the first few minutes that she's on screen, you don't actually see her face. But just like with the Wormwoods, I never felt that she was authentic. I mean, she's headmistress of the school, yet she treats children badly for no particular reason, and nobody does anything about this? In the book, it's explained that adults are just as afraid of Miss Trunchbull as kids are, which not only makes her seem much more frightening, but also creates a plausible explanation for why she's allowed to do these things in the universe that Dahl created. In the movie, the explanation is just that nobody believes the kids when they talk about it. Now, where have I heard that before?
Because you wouldn't have believed me.
Your Redux is coming. At least in the book, Trunchbull did actually care about education and discipline and wasn't just there to slap the kids around. She punished the kids when they got answers wrong or they acted out, which they did often, as we'll discuss in the next round. But if they did well in school and they behaved themselves, she usually left them alone. This makes it seem like she's actually there for a reason, which again makes her more authentic. And I realized that I went with movie last time on this, but looking at it again, I'm not so sure. The movie villains are shot great, really giving us a child's perspective on something scary, but they're just a little bit too cartoony and caricature-like for me to take them seriously. And don't get me wrong, caricature-like characters are kind of Roald Dahl's thing, but he still managed to make them seem authentic, which is kind of necessary for a story about overcoming adversity.
The musical, again, did something of a combination. The Wormwoods are funny, but more in a it's funny because it's true way. We get a pretty clear indication of what kind of people they are in the opening song Miracle, which includes both the ridiculousness of Mrs. Wormwood not realizing she's 9 months pregnant, and a good example of the kind of verbal abuse that Matilda suffered for most of her childhood. I also love that they speak with a markedly different and clearly more lower class accent than the rest of the cast. And Trunchbull, like her book counterpart, is in Cruncham Hall for a reason, and in this case, it's mostly about the discipline. Again, a legitimate reason for wanting someone to be headmistress of a school. Also, she's played by a man in drag. And there's ribbon dancing. It's a win. Ultimately, I think Reg is right. Image and meanness are all well and good, but it's authenticity that sells these villains.
And then we have all the other characters. Most of the other characters are the kids at Cruncham Hall, but we'll start with the other pivotal character in this story, Matilda's teacher, Miss Honey. The two characterizations are very different. Miss Honey in the book is fearful and timid, and at one point she even admits to being a coward. When we learn about her backstory, however, it's no wonder, as she was basically raised by Miss Trunchbull, who it turns out is her aunt. Miss Honey is kind of a cautionary tale for Matilda, as if to say, if you don't stand up to the people who oppress you, then you'll be like this for the rest of your life. At the same time, however, she has a passion for teaching that she has the courage to pursue, despite the fact that it means working under her aunt. Not only does she feel the need to teach, but she also feels the need to protect the students in her charge from the cruelty of Miss Trunchbull, and she's very blunt about warning them what Trunchbull will do to them if they mess up. Movie Miss Honey, though she has basically the same backstory, is a little different. The timidity is still there in the face of Miss Trunchbull, but she is a much stronger character than her book counterpart, and actually does stand up to Miss Trunchbull on a couple of occasions. You get the sense that she overcomes her fear in this movie more than her counterpart in the book does. The downside of this is that she's not as much of a cautionary tale, but I do like the implication that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. So really, either characterization works for me. What really decides this category, though, is the kids at Cruncham Hall. Three of them feature fairly prominently in both book and movie. Lavender, who ends up being Matilda's best friend, Hortensia, an older girl, and Bruce, who is forced to eat a giant chocolate cake. Like you do. What you sense with these three characters, as well as the other kids in the school, is that they are an oppressed and defeated people. Until Matilda comes along and offers leadership in taking down Miss Trunchbull. The book, on the other hand, treats Cruncham Hall as more of a war zone. The students here are already fighting Miss Trunchbull when Matilda arrives. Hortensia, for example, is completely different in the book. Rather than being a girl who's just been toughened by experience, she's compared to a soldier with battle scars and victories under her belt. Lavender's prank with the newt, which in the movie is just a spur-of-the-moment thought from a child who's frightened that her best friend is in the chokey, in the book is a carefully planned operation inspired by the bravery and the fighting of all of the students in the school. And Bruce, in the movie, movie is struggling and ready to give up when he's trying to eat that huge chocolate cake, and it's only when Matilda stands up and starts cheering him on that he finds it within himself to finish. In the book, however, it's the fact that he is still eating that leads to the cheering of the students, which incidentally does not include Matilda, who from all indications is just a silent observer to all this. There are advantages to both characterizations. The movie characterization makes the battle between Matilda and Trunchbull more personal, but the book characterization makes Matilda's power more universal. It basically comes down to personal preference, and mine is still for the characterizations in the book, basically for the same reasons as last time. I prefer the more universal message of power in the book, where Matilda is just one fighter among many who kind of struck the final blow in the battle, as opposed to the leader who inspired a following. I mean, think about it. In the movie, the other kids only really fight when Matilda eggs them on, or when she's already weakened Trunchbull to the point where she was gonna leave anyway.
Now, it's kind of hard to tell which direction the musical went based on just the songs. For Miss Honey, they definitely went more in the direction of the book characterization, but it's kind of hard to tell which direction they took the kids. In School Song, it definitely feels like they're going for more of the oppressed people position, but in Revolting Children, it really feels more like a war zone. At any rate, I agree that both characterizations have their merit, but the kids in the movie are kind of annoying, so I'll go with the book on this one.
And now the imagination of Roald Dahl versus the imagination of Danny DeVito. You'd think that this would be a no-brainer, especially given that I've said twice now that the imagination of Roald Dahl is limitless, and the imagination of Danny DeVito seems to involve a lot of wide-angle close-ups. But let's look at this a little bit more closely. Roald Dahl has a very whimsical style of writing, which you wouldn't think would work for a story that's basically about parental abuse, but he manages to strike that balance between silliness and seriousness, a balance that authors like Louis Sachar, J.K. Rowling, and Lemony Snicket have also managed. There's also the matter of how magic is portrayed. In the book, it's never really the focus of Matilda's character, whereas in the movie, it's basically there to show off the special effects. Especially that scene in the middle, which really serves no other purpose. But as long as we're talking about the effects, let's talk about the effects. Aside from that one scene, the effects in this movie are remarkably simple. They're basically the reason why movie won imagery the last time, and that really hasn't changed. I especially love what they did to make it look as though the chalk is writing on the chalkboard of its own free will. They put a magnet inside the chalk and then had somebody stand with the other magnet on the other side of the board and write the message on the board backwards. That kind of creativity in the effects is always impressive to me. Plus, the wide-angle shots of our villains make them seem much more intimidating and huge, and I really like how they use forced perspective to make us feel like what it feels like to view things as a little kid. I mean, let's face it, it's no easy task to make Danny DeVito look tall. Admittedly, they do go a little overboard with just how much magic Matilda uses, but that's more of a story issue than an imagery one. And really, this story is based more in the real world, and so there's not going to be as much boundless imagination as there was in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Also, once again, narration done right. DeVito, as the narrator, introduces the main theme of the story pretty effectively in the opening sequence, and the narration is never intrusive or annoying. In fact, it kind of feels like someone reading a story to us, which is fitting for a Roald Dahl novel.
It's hard to talk much about the imagery of the stage production, never having seen it, except for clips online of Trunchbull as a man in drag and the use of giant swings in When I Grow Up. So, instead, I'll talk about the music. I'll let Scotty talk about the music.
Thank you. I talked about this musical in passing during my vlog on musicals, but the music here really is quite excellent. Somehow the music manages to capture the whimsy of Roald Dahl's writing. It's the kind of music you'd expect to hear when reading one of his books. And the lyrics use a rather loose rhyming style. They're not usually exact rhymes so much as words that sound similar, but it works mainly because the lyrics don't sound stifled with the need to use exact rhymes. And the songs, especially Miracle, Naughty, and When I Grow Up, give us the themes of the story really pretty effectively. And songs like Loud, The Hammer, and Telly give us good characterizations. Quiet's probably one of my favorites because it really gives us that feeling of what Matilda's going through with all this intelligence being bottled up inside her and starting to boil to a critical mass. And School Song, well, I'm not going to give anything away for that one, but let's just say it's bloody brilliant.
As far as the book and movie are concerned, I agree with Hatter. The simplicity of the movie's imagery is enough to earn it the win here.
Well, it's not tied up like it was before, but we'll still finish off by talking about story. You may have noticed that aside from the one round, my opinions on Matilda, book versus movie, really haven't changed that much, and story is no exception. The main difference between Matilda the book and Matilda the movie basically boils down to whether the victory of Cruncham Hall belongs to all the students of Cruncham Hall, or just Matilda. And this gets into the difference of the students that Reg was talking about. In the movie, the students are pretty much beaten. There's very little rebellion in them, and the little that we do see is invariably led or inspired by Matilda. What I like about this is first that the battle between Matilda and Miss Trunchbull is more personal. But more importantly, we get to see Miss Trunchbull actually lose control of her students. When Matilda stands up and starts cheering Bruce on during the cake eating scene, Trunchbull is clearly at a loss as to how to respond. In the book, we really don't see her lose control. In that same scene, when the students start cheering, she just quells them with a glance. In many ways, that makes her defeat at the end much more satisfying. In the book, the students were fighting long before Matilda got there, and her role is basically to give that final push in a long-fought battle. The advantage to this is that the power that Matilda demonstrates in defeating Trunchbull is the kind of power that any kid anywhere can have. This idea that any kid can and should be able to stand up for themselves, which is also illustrated in the explanation for Matilda's powers. The movie doesn't really explain the powers, they're just kind of there. It's implied that they're kind of an extension of her natural brain power, and that she's able to tap into them through her anger and fear of the people who oppress her. That's similar to the book's explanation for them, but it's kind of an oversimplification. In the book, it's theorized that Matilda's power comes from the fact that even though Matilda has all of this intelligence, she's not allowed to use it to its fullest potential because her parents don't want her to seem smart, and her headmistress will not allow her to move forward a couple of grades even though she easily could. So she doesn't tap into the magic so much as she learns to control what is already leaking out of her. And when she is allowed to use her intelligence to its fullest potential, those powers fade away. This implies, though it doesn't directly say, that this sort of power could be available to any child who is in a similar situation. And that this kind of power exists in every child, not just the lucky few who happen to receive it. And finally, there's the ending, where the book shines and the movie goes downhill. The movie ends with Matilda basically beating the crap out of Miss Trunchbull with her powers, and the other children, it should be noted after Trunchbull has already been weakened and defeated, drive her away from the school. In the book, she just leaves, probably because Matilda's pretending to be the man that she supposedly killed is giving her a guilty conscience. The movie pretty much devolves into what I called the kids rule, adults drool type of movie. This is an idea that was very popular in the 90s. This idea that children can and should be able to wield power over adults. All adults, not just the ones who treat them badly. And what bugs me about this is that almost without fail, they do this by behaving, well, childishly. In contrast, Matilda from the book defeats Trunchbull in a much more mature and intelligent way.
And the musical goes pretty much in that same direction, with all the children fighting against the Trunchbull in the only way they know how. In one scene, the Trunchbull is trying to get them to misspell a word in a spelling bee because if they do, she gets to put them in the chokey. But Miss Honey has taught them too well, and so she has to resort to making up words for them to spell. And after that, the students start to purposefully misspell the words because they know she can't possibly put all of them in the chokey. And the song Quiet that Matilda sings illustrates the source of her powers really effectively. The musical then would seem to handle the story in the same mature way that the book did, rather than devolving into the immaturity of the movie's ending. Though they're both meant for children, the book seems considerably more adult than the movie, and thus, just like last time, tells the better story.
And that's how Matilda would have been handled differently if we did it today. Stay tuned over the next couple of days and we will give you 2 other Books vs. Movies Review Reduxes. Until then, I'm Regular Matt. That's weird. Now anyway, they're the Mad Hatter and Cassie, and we'll see you next time.